I'm just going to turn it on. Go.
Okay. Hi, everybody. I am at the Richmond SPCA, and this is day 14 of the Richmond Public Library's 100 Days RVA Reads, a program promoting the Great American Read by PBS and WCBE. I'm going to be reading from The Call of the Wild, and I am in the cat habitat here at the SPCA in Richmond, and I've got a couple of friends that are going to be sitting with me while I read. The Call of the Wild was written by Jack London in 1903, so it's one of those books that I think everybody read in high school, maybe. I did. And to be honest with you, it was a very difficult book to get through. I'm a very big animal lover, and I've spent a good deal of time here with my friends at the SPCA. And we have a lot of cats and dogs here that have gone through great trials and great challenges, but they have thankfully ended up here. And so anyway, when we chose this book, one of the reasons was I wanted to sort of highlight the struggle from a dog, the main character in the book, a dog named Buck, who was at once a very comfortable domesticated animal in California, and then through many unfortunate circumstances ended up as a sled dog in Alaska, which was something that he was not at all ready to do. But he, in the end, prevailed and he just kind of nurtured more of his wild side. And there's another cat over there. But anyway, I'm just going to read a few passages, and if you haven't read it, I would recommend reading it. It is an iconic American novel, but it is difficult to get through. There are some, actually many passages that are very hard from an aspect of the animals not being treated well and not being treated like we are used to animals being treated now. So anyway, to begin, these are just a few passages, and I trust that I was able to keep these a little bit more pleasurable than some of the passages that I read. So, carry on. It was a hard day's run up the canyon, through sheep camp, past the scales and the timberline, across glaciers and snowdrifts hundreds of feet deep, and over the great Chilkoot Divide, which stands between the saltwater and the fresh and guards forbiddingly the sad and lonely north. They made good time down the chain of lakes, which fills the craters of extinct volcanoes, and late that night pulled into the huge camp at the head of Lake Bennett, where thousands of gold seekers were building boats against the breakup of the ice in the spring. Buck made his hole in the snow and slept the sleep of the exhausted. Just, but all too early, was routed out in the cold darkness and harnessed with his mates to the sled. That day they made 40 miles, the trail being packed, but the next day and for many days to follow they broke their own trail, worked harder, and made poorer time. As a rule, Perrault traveled ahead of the team, packing the snow with webbed shoes to make it easier for them. Francois, guiding the sled at the gee-pole, sometimes exchanged places with him, but not often. Perrault was in a hurry, and he prided himself on his knowledge of ice, which knowledge was indispensable, but the fall ice was very thin, and where there was swift water, there was no ice at all. Day after day, for days unending, Buck toiled in the traces. Always they broke camp in the dark, and the first gray of dawn found them hitting the trail with fresh miles reeled off behind them. And always they pitched camp after dark, eating their bit of fish and crawling to sleep into the snow. Buck was ravenous. The pound and a half of sun-dried salmon, which was his ration for each day, seemed to go nowhere. He never had enough, and he suffered from perpetual hunger pangs. Yet the other dogs, because they weighed less and were born to the life, received a pound only of the fish and managed to keep in good condition. He swiftly lost the fastidiousness which had characterized his old life, and this is a kind of a turning point for him. A dainty eater, he found that his mates, finishing first, robbed him of his unfinished ration. So where before he was used to having food at his disposal and being fed, he now had to fight for his food. So I'm going to jump to a few more passages because there's a few passages that I didn't feel real comfortable reading. But then an old gray wolf, gaunt and battle-scarred, came forward. Buck writhed his lips into the preliminary of a snarl, but sniffed noses with him. Whereupon the old wolf sat down, pointed nose at the moon, and broke out the long wolf howl. The others sat down and howled, and now the call came to Buck in unmistakable accents. He too sat down and howled. This over, he came out of his angle, and the pack crowded around him, sniffing in half-friendly, half-savage manner. The leaders lifted the yelp of the pack and sprang away into the woods. The wolves swung in behind, yelping in chorus, and Buck ran with them, side by side, with the wild brother, yelping as he ran. In the summers there is one visitor, however, to that valley, and of which the Yeehats do not know. It is a great, gloriously coated wolf, like and yet unlike all the other wolves. He crosses alone from the smiling timberland and comes down into an open space among the trees. Here a yellow stream flows from rotted moosehide sacks and sinks into the ground, with long grasses growing through it and vegetable mold overrunning it and hiding its yellow from the sun. And here he muses for a time, howling once, long and mournfully. Here he departs. But he is not always alone. When the long winter nights come on and the wolves follow their meat into the lower valleys, he may be seen running at the head of the pack through the pale moonlight or glimmering borealis, leaping gigantic above his fellows, his great throat a bellow as he sings a song of the younger world, which is the song of the pack. Okay, and that's it as far as the passages. But I wanted to talk a little bit about Jack London and how this book came to be. Jack London was a California native, and he had traveled around the United States as a hobo. I love that word. Returned to California to finish high school. He dropped out when he was 14 and spent a year in college in Berkeley. And in 1897, he went to the Klondike by way of Alaska during the height of the Klondike Gold Rush. So later he said of this experience, it was in the Klondike I found myself, and that is where the impetus for Call of the Wild became a reality. He left California in July and traveled by boat to Dyea, Alaska, where he landed and went inland. To reach the gold fields, he and his party transported their gear over the Chilkoot Pass, often carrying loads as heavy as 100 pounds on their backs. They were successful in staking claims to 8 gold mines along the Stewart River. London stayed in Klondike for almost a year, living temporarily in the frontier town of Dawson City, before moving to a nearby winter camp, where he spent the winter in a temporary shelter reading books he had brought: Charles Darwin's On the Origin of Species and John Milton's Paradise Lost. And so those were books that inspired Call of the Wild. And it, as I said, this is a first edition cover. It's a pulp kind of cover, and it has been adapted into a film. It's been serialized in the Saturday Evening Post, and it's still a very popular book among high school students. But the point he wanted to make is that the once domesticated animal, who went through many difficult times, and was finally became a service dog or a sled dog in Alaska. He became progressively feral in the harsh environment, but he was forced to fight to survive and dominate other dogs. By the end, he sheds the veneer of civilization and relies on primordial instinct and learned experience to emerge as a leader in the wild. Thank you. Excuse me. If you like what you heard, all 100 books are available at your local Richmond Public Library, and you want to be a reader or find out when the next reading is, visit rvalibrary.org/100days join our group on Facebook, and subscribe to our YouTube channel at Richmond Public Library 100 Days. Richmond, let's read. Thank you.